You're listening to Talk to Seattle, and I am your host, Jason Rigdon. On this episode, we have Seattle Cruise Control. They're here to tell us about the environmental effects of Seattle's cruise industry. We also have Lance Randall, who is running for mayor of the city of Seattle. But first, I want to thank the wonderful folks that have been supporting Talk to Seattle on Patreon. Thank you so much for your cash. I really appreciate it. But I'm ending the Talk to Seattle Patreon. I don't think it really fits with the mission of this show. It seems like for Patreon to work, you really need to put some episodes behind a paywall, and I'm just not willing to do that for this show. So going forward, I'm just going to try to fully embrace the non-commercial nature of this show. No Patreon and no paid commercials. If you like the show and you want to show support for my work, please just tell a friend about Talk to Seattle. In that theme of non-commercial stuff, I'd like to remind my listeners that this show is freely available under the Creative Commons Attribution License. That means that you can share, copy, remix, transform, and redistribute this show in any way you want as long as you give me credit. Check the Creative Commons license for more details. One more thing before I go. I really depend on my listeners to suggest guests for the show. So if you have someone you would like to hear on Talk to Seattle, please send me an email at jasonrigdon@gmail.com. Once again, that is my name, jasonrigdon@gmail.com.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. My name's Stacy Oaks, and I am an organizer with 350 Seattle, which has a maritime solutions team. And I'm also part of Seattle Cruise Control.
And could you tell me a little bit about specifically Seattle Cruise Control?
Yeah, Seattle Cruise Control is a grassroots group that really started in response to the Port of Seattle plan to build a third cruise ship terminal at Terminal 46. And so there was a little bit of wait, we definitely don't need to do this. And, there was some people that were concerned about that. And so we just kind of came together to start working on that issue, and have since, really delved into cruise ships a little bit farther in general, and how it really impacts our region right here in Seattle, but also on the whole run up to Alaska.
So what are some of your top concerns about the cruise industry in Seattle?
Well, I think, one way to kind of boil it down is that the impacts are great and the rewards are somewhat overinflated. So there's quite a few reasons why the cruise ships in general, but also specifically expanding cruise ship traffic here would be harmful. And, there's some that people probably wouldn't come to mind right away, and others that maybe you wouldn't think about. And some of those might be the impact to marine life. We know and love our orcas here, which are already struggling and endangered. And the cruise ships are going to be putting out all kinds of pollution for them. You're talking about actual physical pollution with garbage and plastic. And you're also talking about the pollution from dumping human waste, engine scrubber waste straight into the water. Now, of course, that doesn't happen right here in Seattle. But to think that these cruise ships going between here and Alaska, that we should only care about, the water directly out of our door is pretty silly, because water doesn't respect borders. So those impacts to the species, as well as noise pollution, is a type of pollution that isn't often talked about, but that's going to interfere when you're talking about ship strikes and physically, striking whales, as well as that's going to interfere with the sonar. So it makes it harder for them to communicate. It makes them harder to locate food. And we know that orcas and other whales are, aren't doing well as far as being undernourished. So there's quite a few ways the pollution affects our marine life here. It's also going to impact us as far as just increasing these type of fossil fuel heavy industries that are impacting us climate-wise. There's a great resource that I believe was done by part of UW, where it actually lists the climate impacts to the Northwest specifically. And they list them as the health impacts. They talk about the financial impacts that we end up facing because of those things. And this isn't like in the future we might. This is today already. These are the things that's costing us. These are some of the projections. And so taking into those things into account, those negative, both social and financial costs are not often brought into the discussion when the Port of Seattle is talking about all the economic benefits, it's kind of a one-sided tally where you're not actually looking at the outgoing impacts. You're only talking about the positive, and those positives even are questionable as far as, are they accurate? Are they misleading in maybe talking about certain sections in a way that the public might think it's one thing, but it's really only kind of something else? So there's a lot of articles about other locations that have been done with cruise ships that show that the amounts that ports and industry are saying, like, each person that's on the cruise ship spends are overinflated significantly. And then when you compare that number of, say, a tourist that was here by another means, that's probably going to be spending more days here, the amount spent from that cruise visitor for a part of a day, or maybe almost 24 hours or so right before, after getting here on a flight to go onto this cruise, is, I mean, miles away from the amount spent per person when you're talking about somebody who came here and is staying in Seattle or one of our surrounding communities for a number of days. So tourism in itself, right, is a big thing for us, but trying to imagine which kinds of tourism are actually helping our communities, aren't harming the places that you're meant to come and visit with health impacts, with things like, we know climate is driving the increased wildfires, right? So are you going to take a cruise through Seattle or Alaska if the wildfire smoke is really bad that time? No, you're going to book your cruise somewhere else. So we're really tripping ourselves up for the future for like this little bit of maybe profit today. And we're not thinking long term of what types of tourism and local businesses of support can we promote that are going to be much more resilient to where we're kind of headed with our climate impacts from these very behaviors, right? Another impact area for us that we try to be really conscious about is the workers that are involved with cruise ships. Now, when Seattle might talk about how this creates good jobs, they're probably only focusing on, say, jobs right at the port, potentially some of the jobs that are created for the few companies that get their commodities on board the boats. So there's, some benefits for certain companies. Some of the hotels, kind of benefit from it. So, the industry and our port locally here is going to count those jobs and talk about that those jobs are and might be quite good jobs. But we have to kind of care about the rest of the life cycle of any kind of industry or business that we're doing. And a lot of the workers on cruise ships that are doing hospitality work, that are from other countries, you're looking at hourly wages that are less than $3 an hour. You're looking at people who don't get to choose whether they work overtime. You're looking at people who might have their passports locked away somewhere on that ship. And if they're ready to go home, it's not really up to them anymore. And we saw that really in a really ugly way recently with the coronavirus, where there were tens of thousands of crew members that they didn't bother to repatriate back to where they came from because they didn't want to pay the costs of doing it the way that the guidelines would have made them do it, to get them separate transportation instead of putting them on public transportation. And I mean, 6 months, 9 months later, I cannot even imagine being stuck in a room on a cruise ship for that long, not knowing when you get to go home, not being paid. Most of them were not necessarily, if they weren't needed, they weren't getting paid. They were just stuck there with multiple suicides. And so I think this is a really big opportunity to highlight that. And there's actually a Patriot Act episode with Hassan Minaj that gets into cruise ships really well. If anybody wants like a nice little, with some humor in their starter on some of the reasons why cruise ships are bad, I do highly recommend that episode. Yeah, so I mean, there's really there's a lot of different impacts that come into play, and on a health side too, there's impacts to our community. Again, we talked about health impacts from climate, but there's also local health impacts from the just literally what comes out of the smokestacks of these ships, right? And that again is an area where we should be really caring about not just ourselves, but everybody along the stops, right? Everybody from here to Alaska, of the coastlines in between that are going to be getting some of that drift that can go for quite a few miles. And you're talking about particulate matter, you're talking about carcinogens, and particulate matter is the leading cause of environmental related death. We're also seeing that it was ending up affecting people more with COVID if they had a lot of exposure to particulate matter. But locally here too, we need to think about the traffic related with these cruises as well. And so you're talking about all the communities that are already getting a lot of traffic pollution. This is going to be more on some really already overtaxed corridors. About 80 to 90% of the people that go on a cruise from Seattle fly in here. So we're also talking about all of the people that are already affected air quality wise by the airport. This affects you. You know, for here in Seattle, to have all of those flights be associated with it, and then you're having the ground transportation from the airport to the cruise destination. So for that little area, which is already has a pretty ugly score on the health disparities map, it's definitely adding a lot more to that. The T46 expansion is also right next to, the arena. So you're talking about those health impacts getting to our players and to our fans that are out there potentially, and adding more traffic to that area. So there's just a lot. There's a lot of reasons that maybe we should be thinking about and including when we talk about expanding cruise, but also talking during this pause on cruise about, is there changes we want to even make to the existing plan around cruise ships, and or is there mitigation things that need to happen around that, like fees that end up going towards things that would help out the health of the people in that corridor. And the extent to which this affects our region on a climate level, there's a stat that just like floors me. And it was one of our other Seattle Cruise Control members. They did the numbers on this. And when you account for both those flights, for that 80 to 90% of the people that are coming through the Seattle specifically cruises, plus the actual footprint of that cruise, that little 6-month season, if we use the 2019 numbers, our last regular season, it is equal to about a third of the entire footprint of the city of Seattle for the year. So 6 months just from the flights and the cruises for that little bit is equal to about a third of what Seattle as a city, not counting these things, is doing by itself. So that's the amount of impact that we could be having when we start thinking through, is this really a responsible form of tourism for us here locally? What do we want to be inviting into our communities and inviting to stay in our communities?
We've been talking about the cruise industry in Seattle for a very long time. And, I feel like every time it comes up, they talk about the economic impact of it, of bringing these ships into town, will bring so many jobs and stuff. Have those promises actually happened? Have they fulfilled their promises?
It's hard to tell. That's one of the things, is the transparency is also a problem. The way information is portrayed to the public is often, again, misleading, or in a jargon that the regular person would have no way of really like understanding the full implications of. For instance, even at one point, and I don't know if they've already fixed it after Seattle Cruise Control pointed it out to them, but they were, listing the number of cruise passengers that come here. So you're saying we get this many passengers as like look how big this industry is. Well, they were counting every time the customer touched like land here, right? So they were counting both leaving and coming back in their passenger numbers. Now, this is apparently an industry standard of doing this. So, okay, everybody else is doing it. All right, you're not like the worst folks, but do we need to be part of that bandwagon? I don't think we do, right? So there's things like that throughout the whole, when you try to look into this, you're going to find those things where you have to dissect every bit of language. You have to send emails and ask, hey, what do you mean by this? So it's, it's more like trying to figure it out is definitely an intense process. And I think that that's one of those things where we need the Port of Seattle to provide a more detailed and um, average user friendly kind of version of like, we get this much money in hotels. We get this much money that we're counting as far as those goods that get taken onto the ship and sold on there. We think it brought in this many people going to the museum. You know, if this is kind of what we're saying with the money made here, same thing with the jobs. Okay, what all jobs are you counting? Are you, kind of, oh, well, they're selling those apples on there. So we probably created more jobs. Or are we just counting the actual jobs that you could say, like, we hired this many dock workers, we think it brought in this many more Uber drivers, and again, are those good jobs? In that, are they year round, even though we don't have a year round cruise season, or is this going to be people living without benefits? Is this jobs that would be double counted? Since I'm only doing it for this season and I'm doing something else the other side of the year, is this another on and off the boat double counting situation? So we don't really know with Seattle specifically, but again, looking at more global places where there has been studies done, things tend to be, again, the industry standard would be to inflate those things. And again, are we counting the opposite? Like, what jobs are either being displaced or those kind of things by having this here taking up that space?
And how does the port and the city kind of support this cruise industry in the terms of, do they get subsidies or tax breaks? Like, are they really making it on their own, or is the government kind of helping them?
Well, I think it's a little bit, there's some of all of that happening. The T46 plan to put in a new cruise terminal, for instance, was going to be a public-private partnership, which means that part of it would come from the public, from tax money from everyone in King County that puts in money towards the port. And then the other part would be by a cruise ship partner who we didn't have one signed on yet. And they would then pay the other half. It wasn't technically explicit in there, but this would have cost $200 million, meaning if they split it in half, that's $100 million for the people here, and then $100 million for the cruise industry. But we don't even know for sure if it would have been a 50-50 split. There was nothing in writing yet because there wasn't a partner found. So sometimes looking out for those things where it's public-private partnership, we are literally funding the infrastructure. And then as far as tax breaks and things like that, I'm not sure as far as are they getting any locally, but when you look at cruise companies in general, they are not registered in the United States. They are not paying taxes. So in general, they are putting a big footprint on our land, on our resources, but they're not putting any taxes that help to deal with those things. So there's a certain amount of take happening that way. And the reason that they get to do that is often referred, it's around, some people call it flying a flag of convenience. There's a certain number of countries where you have really lax tax laws, where you also have really lax or non-existent labor laws, lax or non-existent environmental laws. And so this is, again, why they get away with paying people that those really low wages and working those conditions. So in a sense, they're getting those things that way. And one of the other things that our port could be doing is that I believe as these landlord tenants, we are technically, renting space to these cruise companies to be on that pier, on that port. As we do that, we are technically allowed to levy fees on them for using that space. And the political will would need to be there, but we could decide we wanted to charge them fees for those health impacts, for the road maintenance, for those sections. We could be utilizing the tools at our disposal in a little bit different way to hold them more accountable. We could be using shore power mandatory instead of optional if we wanted to. The the commissioners at Port of Seattle would have argued, as we've discussed this, that, but then they just wouldn't stop here, or, like they'd go find somewhere else if we started to get tough with them. And, maybe it's true, but then maybe that would be a good thing. Or maybe it's not really true because, if we're trying to say this is such a great and bustling thing that we need to build a new terminal, then, getting a little tougher, maybe it wouldn't scare them away. And on as far as, again, just kind of pointing out another place where overstating and making something look a little different than it is, using shore power is touted as one of the reasons that the Port of Seattle is trying to be, quote, the greenest port in North America. And it's uplifted as one of these great things that we're doing. But when you look at, again, a life cycle of the emissions of a cruise ship on a single sailing, say up to Alaska and back, the shore power cuts out about 1% of the total emissions. So yes, we've created this cleaner port area for our people that live right here. Luckily, about half of those cruise ships aren't constantly emitting stuff while they're sitting there docked. But in the places that they go, they probably are. So you're talking about Alaska, you're talking about in Canada. And but that idea that you're displacing that certain amount of percent being uplifted, it should be uplifted as a health plus, but should it be uplifted as this big green plus when it's only taking away that little sliver? And the port also has been bragging recently that they have met their 2030 climate goals 10 years early because they made a switch from using fossil fuel gas in their airport buildings into using some renewable natural gas from a contract that they picked up. So by doing that, they're counting that they have met the lowering amount that they needed to meet their 2030 goals. And here's where it's really misleading. They're only talking about what they call their scope 1 emissions, which is basically, this is the footprint that they physically make. This is their building, their transportation fleet, physically within their control and their ownership. And so they apparently made those goals by doing this. But scope 2 and 3 is really where it's at as far as climate damage, right? So the scope 3 would be that life cycle, right? That is what's happening once it leaves here in all these other places. And those emissions, their total emissions, are continuing to rise. Yet they're touting how they made these goals all in kind of at the same time. And so again, that attempt to mislead should definitely put kind of a pinpoint in why we should push so hard to get more transparency on the jobs they say are created and the tourism money that they say is coming in from this form of tourism.
This is kind of beyond the scope of our conversation today, but it feels so typical of so many of these public-private partnerships where, the public investment is oftentimes much higher than they said it was going to be. The jobs are inflated. The whole economic impact isn't there. It reminds me of some of the stadiums and many other public-private partnerships where when you really sit down and do the math objectively, we get the short end of the stick. So you don't have to comment on that if you don't want to.
It, again, does kind of seem like a playbook standard to do that, right? Whether that's intentional or just the way things go. Once the contracts are signed, then all of a sudden different parts of that contract decide it's kind of okay to change it up. But it does kind of feel that way. And so it's estimated to be 200 million, right? But what happens if the cost of it continues to go up? And in this case, I believe like there's certain things around with the port, it ends up causing like property tax levies. If we take out a loan that doesn't get paid back, there's a function where it automatically like is okay to get taken out of taxes. So it can exponentially grow for sure.
So you can tell me a little bit more about the issues surrounding this Terminal 48.
Yeah, Terminal 46 is...
I'm sorry, 46, sorry.
Yeah, so that would be right near Pioneer Square. And I know there's another group in Pioneer Square that we're pushing back against this terminal as well called Right the Ship Seattle. And they have a website that can be visited as well. And, one of the things they were finding on a business level was that on some of the times when cruise ships are there, it's actually harder for some of the local businesses, like say the coffee shops that might have a lot of regulars come in. So year long, that's where, your kind of moneymaker is these people are coming back, you're building relationships there. And to have all of a sudden a giant cruise rush means there's a bunch of days where those locals can't get their stuff there, right? So you kind of learn a different place to go for your regular. So there is some of that kind of displacement of locals for cruise traffic when you have a large kind of flock of people coming in with some of those ships. And as well, again, when we look at those health impacts of the actual emissions, it's definitely not something that I would want right next to my home, right next to my business where I go jogging. Again, next to the arena, there's the traffic implications of that. Already kind of being a really difficult area to get around in. So, so in general, like the placement of it being a cruise ship terminal brings up some of its own challenges, even if you were to set aside temporarily the climate the climate risk of again expanding an industry that again doesn't seem to have even a strong desire to really lean into looking for solutions on dealing with fossil fuels. And frankly, it's a luxury, non-essential industry, right? That's not to put down the people whose jobs are currently reliant on that, or that they should be taken care of as we think about how to go around this, and to think, how do we make sure that places like the cities in Alaska that the cruise ships go, how are we supporting them? Even right now, I wish that there was more help as far as recovery money going straight to local people in Alaska that are impacted by the business, not necessarily the businesses that are owned by the same people that own the cruise ships, because there's a lot of those businesses that pop up there. But who are the actual local people up there that are being affected by this loss of cruise dollars? And instead of talking about giving federal money to cruise ships, because they need to, keep going, where can we invest in again, new ways for there to potentially be less harmful tourism or other opportunities for the jobs that really are lost, or the really necessary income for like the places in Alaska, I think is really important to think through.
If people are listening to us right now and they want to like take action, like how should they go about that? Where should they begin to like learn more about this issue?
We do have a website, seattlecruisecontrol.org. There's also, to learn a little bit more about maritime in general, 350seattle.org has a team page about our maritime solutions team with some great information. I get righttheshipseattle.org for the more Pioneer Square focused views of things going on. And the Seattle Cruise Control does have a Twitter and a Facebook that are active. So following those on social media is a great way to see things right as they're happening. And as far as taking action, one of the things you can be doing is letting the port commissioners know how you feel about cruise ships, about the idea of expanding, but also the idea that we should be really looking into other options so that we are not financially or job dependent on an industry that again is clearly impacted by things like we're seeing with the pandemic for long hauls at a time, but also that are enhancing our communities instead of harming them. And one of the ways to do that is the Port Commission has a public comment opportunity twice a month on the second and fourth Tuesday of every month at noon. And previously you had to kind of get yourself down to the airport or get down to Pier 69, but it is easier than ever to just hop on Zoom or the phone and say, hey, this is how I'm feeling about this. We do it quite a bit but to hear from new people is actually really impacting. So it can really help. I know it kind of feels like it doesn't, but there's detailed instructions on how to sign up for that on the seattlecruisecontrol.org Take Action. And so that'll let you know how to sign up. You usually get about 2 minutes, and just speak from the heart. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to be passionate and kind of share your story about why this impacts you or why it's important to you.
So I'll be honest, I don't really know much about the cruise industry or really even just the maritime industry. Is there any questions that I should have asked you that you wish I did?
So another thing that is kind of one of those areas where we're seeing a lot of misinformation and kind of an industry attempt to, I would say, greenwash, if you're familiar with that term, where you kind of make something look a little bit more climate friendly than it really is LNG, or liquefied natural gas. It's been talked about as, hey, this is going to be, a climate solution for shipping because it has such a smaller carbon footprint, right? So when you're talking about natural, little air quotes there, gas, what you're talking about usually is going to be gas that comes from fracking nowadays, because we've exhausted a lot of our conventional ways of getting gas. And so fracking has a much bigger methane kind of leakage rate during that process than it used to be for conventional. So when we started talking about gas as a bridge fuel, I was probably in grade school. So we're talking, the bridge is gone. One, because the way that we get the gas has changed and it has a bigger footprint. And two, because we have run out of so much of that time that we should have been using that bridge fuel to get to real solutions that are not based on fossil fuels. If you're listening to science, you know that switching from one fossil fuel to another one is not going to get us where we need to get to. So right off the bat, that's one reason that it's kind of a false solution. But where that greenwashing comes in is that the burning that gas is technically cleaner at the point of burning. So that means if you're literally standing on that ship, then you are probably getting a health benefit, right? So you're not getting as much of that air pollution right there on that ship. But that pollution is just being transferred to point of extraction. So it's those workers, it's those communities, which are often indigenous communities, are going to be closest to those places. We're just trading our pollution from one end to the other. And that's definitely, again, not going to get us where we need to get. And it's just really misleading to try and kind of pit workers against climate, which is another way of keeping us from getting solutions, is by really pushing that false narrative. So it is cleaner at point of burning, but when you look at life cycle emissions from extraction to use, you're looking at potentially worse than the bunker fuel they're using. You're looking at potentially worse than even their lowest grade marine oil. And the International Maritime Organization commissioned a study in either 2017 or 2018 to look at LNG as a shipping fuel. And key solution right on the front of their study says, quote, LNG is not a climate solution for shipping. So we've had that in our pocket for a couple years, yet you've still got Carnival talking about, like, we're going to be green because we're making ships to go with LNG. You still have companies like Puget Sound Energy saying that building the really controversial Tacoma project on the ancestral tide flats of the Puyallup tribe down in Tacoma, that's being built for shipping fuel. So we're doing that harm based on the lie that this is a boon for the climate if we replace shipping fuel with this. So it's impacting our neighbors not far away in a really big way, again, with a ton of air pollution from that facility in itself, breaking the Puyallup Tribe's treaty, and causing a lot of harm in that extraction area that would be up in BC, Canada. So we need to kind of, we need to think holistically when we think solutions. But it's definitely kind of one of those big lies that's still floating around for the industry that doesn't want to let it go. But you also see companies like Maersk, one of the biggest shipping companies, that said, yep, okay, we see it's not a solution. And they just leaned heavily into, we're going to dump a ton of money into looking at other solutions. And so they're looking at other things right now. And they've just said that they think they're going to reach some of their goals like 5-6 years early now that they've started doing that. Is what they're doing the perfect solutions? I don't know. But at least they've admitted what the problem is and are trying to lean into it in a way that, well, even if they don't have the right solution, it should help provide that information to others in the industry about what works and what doesn't. So there are companies that are taking it seriously within the maritime industries as well that we can look at. But the Port of Seattle, unfortunately, the commissioners, as far as I know, have not kind of acquiesced against furthering that narrative on LNG being good for climate. As far as I know, it's still in our Washington State Maritime Blue 2050 strategy, right up there with solar and wind in those same categories.
Well, thank you so much for your time today and also for the work you're doing. If people want to learn more about the organization, where should they go?
So again, SeattleCruiseControl.org is that website, and then also 350seattle.org, and then click on teams, and we're in the solutions section for the maritime team there.
All right, I'll have those links in the show notes. Once again, thank you so much for your time and all your efforts in helping our community.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Do you ever watch X-Files sightings or maybe Dark Skies on TV back in the day? Or maybe you used to listen to Art Bell on the radio late at night? Do you like strange stories and mysteries? Well, then I might have something that you might enjoy. I've got a new project called The Podcast of Mystery. It's an interview show like this one, but instead of talking to local politicians, activists, and artists, I talk to chickamen, psychics, ghost hunters, alien abductees, astrologers, and space lawyers. I also talk to sci-fi and horror writers, filmmakers, and visual artists. For example, my next episode that will be coming out next Tuesday morning will be all about D.B. Cooper and time travel. So, if you're looking for something a little strange, fun, and sometimes creepy, check out my new show, The Podcast of Mystery, at podcastofmystery.com. I've got 5 episodes already available right now if you want a little escape from reality. And right now, who doesn't? Please check out podcastofmystery.com.
Okay, my name is Lance Randall, and I'm running for mayor of Seattle, Washington.
And why do you want to be mayor of Seattle?
I want to be mayor of Seattle because we are facing some serious challenges right now. We have gone through a year that is probably one of the most difficult years Seattle has faced in a long time. We've had to deal with the pandemic. We've had to deal with social justice issues. And of course, our economy has been devastated because of the pandemic. So we have some challenges ahead of us that we're going to have to face. And I believe that it's going to take a leader with a special skill set, with some experience, pragmatic thinking, and a plan to move us forward. So in taking a look at my background, my experience over the years in politics and economic development, and having worked in municipal government for 4 mayors back in Georgia, where I'm originally from, and working with 3 mayors here in Seattle, I'm uniquely prepared for this position. I'm a political scientist. I'm an economic development practitioner. I am an entrepreneur, business owner, and I'm also an artist. So I'm a musician, which fits perfectly in the city of Seattle, which is known for innovation and talent, creativity, and accomplishments. So this unique skill set that I have, I'm offering it to the voters so they can consider me as the leader to help get us out of this situation that we're facing right now, and to bring us together in a spirit of unity so that we can overcome our challenges, not only as a city, but as a large community of people who just want the best for one another and the best for the city. So in looking at a background, I think I'm the best qualified, and I have some very unique plans that I want to propose to the voters of the city of Seattle to consider to move us forward. And all of my plans are very inclusive, very strategic, measured, and designed to accomplish results.
Yeah, so could we learn a little more about your background and experience and what you'd be bringing to this job?
Okay, well, I have a very unique background that I think makes me the best candidate for this position. Number one, I am a political scientist, so I graduated with a degree in political science. I have studied it formally. And once I graduated from college, I immediately went to work for a mayor in my hometown of Macon, Georgia. But let me back up a step. While I was in college, I did work on the staff of a state senator by the name of Gloria Lala of Prince George's County. And that was my first opportunity to begin to use my degree in political science by helping her create policy for her constituents and also being responsive to her constituents in her district. So then I came back to Macon after graduating and began to work for a mayor by the name of Lee Robinson on his staff, working very closely with the chief administrative officer, a gentleman by the name of Israel Small. And I was his protege. And my job was to take on projects with every city department, whether it's the police department, fire department, public works, recreation. Every city department, I had projects where I worked with the city department heads. So that's how I began to learn how to work with city department heads, to work with them on their budgets, and to assist them in their responsibilities to serve the citizens of Macon. I also had the opportunity to work with our city council members, which is a district set up the same as it is here in Seattle. And I know it's relatively new to be operating from a district setup as far as the city council. I think this should be our third time having such a setup. But I've worked in municipal government where I had to work with council members who represent districts. So I understand how it works. I understand what's important to council members and their districts and how to build relationships and partnerships with the mayor's office, which is part of my job while working with the mayor. But in addition to working on that mayoral staff, there were 3 other mayors that appointed me to other key positions during their tenure. I was head of the Workforce Investment Board. I was also appointed to be part of the Housing Authority. And I was also appointed to be what they call a loan executive for United Way, representing the city, where we would go around and visit businesses around the region to raise money for nonprofits. And I've also worked for a United States Congressman, a gentleman by the name of Sanford Bishop, who represents the 2nd Congressional District of Georgia. My responsibility was being the director of constituent services for the congressman. We had 566,000 constituents that we had to take care of, and I had a staff of 16. And every phone call, every letter that came in, because we didn't have cell phones and computers was just getting started back in the 90s. But I was responsible to respond to every inquiry that came in from the constituents to the congressman. So we had to solve problems. We had to work with federal agencies. And we also had to do research for the congressman as he was considering what legislation he was going to support and what legislation he was going to put forth for consideration by his colleagues to vote on. That experience helped me understand policy development, outreach, coordination, and teamwork when it comes to trying to make the appropriate political decisions on behalf of your constituents. We had probably one of the best operations on Capitol Hill when it comes to constituent services. In addition, I have a strong pedigree in politics. My grandfather, who was also a civil rights leader in Macon-Bibb County, he was the leader of the bus boycott, and he was also a successful businessman. And he was the leader of the NAACP and other social justice organizations in Macon. but he was also a county commissioner. He was elected as the first Black county commissioner from Bibb County, Georgia. My father was an attorney, and back in the late 60s, early 70s, he worked for the NAACP, handling civil rights cases in the northeast part of the country. New York, Delaware, Connecticut, Philly. Then he made his way back to Macon and practiced law. And eventually he ran for office, and he was elected as the first Black state representative from Bibb County, Georgia. He was there for 24 years. And then he was appointed to be the civil court judge and chief magistrate of Bibb County, again, the first Black to hold that position. And when he was appointed, it was assumed that I would take his position, which I had been preparing to step in his shoes. But I had gotten a divorce from my first wife, and I ended up with custody of the 4 kids. So I had to make a decision because they were very young at the time. Do I try to juggle fatherhood and politics at the same time? I opted to take care of my kids first and told my father I couldn't run for a seat. But I did encourage my younger sister to run for the seat. And the deal we cut was if I run her campaign for her, that she would run for the seat, which I did. And she won with 80% of the vote. My grandfather was elected official for 6 years before he passed. My father was elected official for 44 years before he retired in 2018. And my sister was a state representative for another 18 years. The connection to all 3 of these public officials, other than being family, is I ran and worked on all their campaigns, and I also helped each one of them with their policy points and also advised them on how to handle their positions as elected officials. I also ran for office myself. In 2004, I ran for chairman of the county commission of Bibb County. I was the youngest one in the race and the only Black person in the race. And I made history by getting the Democratic nomination, which was the first in the history of Bibb County that African American got the nomination. I lost in the general election to a Republican by roughly 1,200 votes. But it was a great experience. We pulled together a great team, and people were very impressed of how we ran the campaign. The following year, I was encouraged by the team that I had put together to run for mayor, which was up again, a seat that was up. So I ran for mayor of Macon and came in 3rd out of 7. I came behind the winner, who was a state representative and a former city council member, and the city council president. There were other people behind me who had held office before, but I came in 3rd in that race, which was a great experience. So you have to start somewhere when you're running for office to get the experience. So after doing that, now we're going to shift gears to the other side. That's the political side. The other side of my background is economic development. I've been doing economic development for over 26 years. When I left the congressman's office, I went to work for a public-private partnership called the Macon Economic Development Commission. And I was a project manager, and my role was to recruit businesses to Bibb County from around the world that expressed their interest in relocating their operations or expanding their operations in Bibb County. So my job was to sell the city, to pull together teams of people to respond to requests, needs of the businesses, to put together special tax schedules, to find them a site, to help them find employees, whatever I need to do to attract them to come to Macon, Georgia. That was my role. And I'm proud to say I was able to bring 30 companies to Bibb County, Georgia in that position. Then I was promoted. Well, let me go back. After 5 years of doing this particular job, I went back to school at the Economic Development Institute at the University of Oklahoma, which is a special school for economic development practitioners who have been practicing for 5 years. So I went to the school and completed my 3 years, did my thesis, and I was fortunate to be selected by my colleagues to receive the Robert B. Castle Award, which is an award given to the top student in the class. And I was also the class representative to sit at the table with the curriculum committee to design the curriculum for future classes. So that was an honor for me in that. So now I shifted gears to go work for the Greater Macon Chamber of Commerce to be the vice president of the existing industry. And in that role, my job was not to recruit so much, but it was to focus on the businesses that were already in Macon, Georgia, to take care of them. Any issues or problems or concerns that they had, if there was any danger of them shutting down or any danger of them relocating, any issues or problems they had, again, my job was to pull people together, whether it was elected officials, departments, lending institutions, to figure out how we can keep these businesses operating and thriving in Bibb County. I would visit over 100 businesses annually. And over my tenure in that position, I visited over 600 businesses personally, proactively checking on businesses to make sure that they have what they need in solving problems. I also received an award for my work in the existing industry from the Georgia Economic Development Association, where they awarded my program the Service to Existing Industry Award for having the best business retention and expansion program in the state of Georgia. So after I ran for office the last time, in 2007, I transitioned here to Seattle, Washington under Greg Nichols. He was the mayor, and I was recruited here to work for the Seattle Office of Economic Development. My role was to do business recruiting, retention and expansion, some workforce development. And then I kind of got into working with the Office of Film and Music as well. Again, my role was to attract businesses to Seattle from around the world, and also to take care of businesses that were in Seattle. I've been able to attract a lot of prominent businesses and events to Seattle. For example, a lot of people may not know, but the Rock and Roll Marathon, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, that is one of the events that I was able to bring here to Seattle, working with the elite group, the governor's office, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the police department, and also the Hotel Association. And that event is still going on today. I guess a lot of people wouldn't know that there is a gaming school in Seattle Center in the Army building on the top floors, and it's called the Academy for Interactive Entertainment, which is a school that I recruited here from Australia. We were competing against Austin, Texas, and I convinced him to bring the school here to Seattle. Northeastern University, which is based in Boston, Massachusetts. I worked with Taylor Washburn with the Greater Seattle Chamber of Commerce to bring Northeastern University here to Seattle. They set up a satellite location for online students down in Lake Union. There are many other, businesses and events that I brought here. One I want to mention, which happened back in 2010. I almost was able to recruit an indoor professional lacrosse team to Seattle, but I couldn't work it out. We had some scheduling conflicts at Key Arena, and we didn't have enough room for all their equipment. But I was able to connect them to Everett, where they located the team from San Jose to Everett, and they were able to play there. But what's interesting about this was they had a conflict of schedule where the circus was coming in Everett, and they needed a place to play a playoff game. So they contacted me and asked me could I help them out. So working with Robert Nellums over at Seattle Center, we were able to bring the first and only professional indoor lacrosse game to the city of Seattle. And I had the honor of dropping the ball for being the ball at the beginning of the game for my efforts to bring them there. So I've worked all over the city with basically every business association, helping them identify and serve the businesses in their respective neighborhood districts. I've worked with large corporations to help them with issues or challenges, or even to just be available to convince people that they're trying to recruit to Seattle to come and work, to show them about the quality of life and opportunities that appear. I've also been the person that any delegation that would come to visit Seattle from around the world. That was a very important part of my job under McGinn's administration, where delegations from Egypt, Brazil, China, Japan, Macedonia, you name it. My job was to meet with these delegations with an interpreter and talk about Seattle and the opportunities and how it would make sense for them to do business in the city of Seattle. So Worked for the city of Seattle for 8 years. Had a chance to work with every city department to resolve issues on behalf of businesses in Seattle. Also had a chance to work with some council members on some issues. Worked with Councilmember Sally Bagshaw. Worked with Tim Burgess on some things. Nick Licata. Even some current council members I've actually helped with some issues, like Tammy Morales. Before she got elected, there was some issues with a nonprofit that she was a part of down in Southeast Seattle. Help with that, and also with Councilmember Sawan's office called me to help with the issue that was going on in the Central District about 2 businesses being displaced. So after working with the city for 8 years, I transitioned down to Southeast Seattle, which is where I live, to work for an organization called Southeast Effective Development. And this organization has a 3-pronged mission. We do affordable housing, arts and culture, and economic development. I was hired to be the economic development director. And in that role, I've been very successful. The one project I'm very proud of, even though I've brought several into Southeast Seattle, the largest Planet Fitness gym in the state is located in Rainier Beach. And I was I was very instrumental in making that happen. I had to do some permitting research on behalf of the franchise, and I also had to facilitate discussions between the franchise and the community to make sure that there was a benefit that they were going to be bringing to the table, which they did, which was discounted rates for police officers, opportunities for the athletes at Rainier Beach to come and work out, and also they make donations to the Boys and Girls Club. I've worked very closely with immigrant businesses, minority businesses, and small businesses in Southeast Seattle, connected them to resources, helping them find financing, space, what have you. So, what I've given you is a snapshot of my background as a person, as a candidate who has a political background, economic development background, has been on the ground working all over the city, solving problems for businesses, helping quality of life in helping build quality of life in neighborhoods, and just doing the things to keep Seattle thriving. So we're in a situation where we're facing some challenges, and I believe that I have the background, the expertise, the ability, and the connections to lead us forward as we are coming out of these challenges. So there you have it. I'm just a humble public servant from the red hills of Georgia that came out to the beautiful Pacific Northwest, to a beautiful city that I love, and I'm just trying to do my part to move us forward in a positive direction.
Sounds like you've got quite a bit of experience. What do you see with that experience as being the biggest challenges for our city?
Well, there's several challenges that we're looking at, but the ones that I'm hearing about the most has to do with public safety. There appears to be something that has gone wrong with our system of public safety. We're dealing with a response to what happened to Brother George Floyd out in Minneapolis. But I think this is just a buildup of what has been happening for too long, for too many years, when it comes to Black people in this country being abused and killed by certain police officers who have biases against us. And as a result, there are constant conversations, there are constant protests, there are lawsuits, there are all types of things that are going on against police departments around the country. And it's specific, certain police officers who have committed these atrocities. But in the midst of this, I think there have been some decisions that have been made that have made us less safe here in Seattle. As the mayor of Seattle, I will have a responsibility to keep every citizen safe. And I do that through a public service safety delivery system. And that system consists of 4 very important agencies: the police department, the fire department, the ambulance drivers or the EMTs, and the human service providers who provide intervention in crisis. Those 4 agencies have to be well-staffed, well-funded, and well-supported. Whenever one of those agencies is hindered or weakened the entire public safety service delivery system can be put in jeopardy, which means that we're all less safe. And I think that is what has happened. Unfortunately, the city council decided to reduce the funding to the police department substantially, which has caused a lot of good police officers to leave the force, which is leaving us understaffed for a city of 783,000 people. There have also been some decisions made to relax certain ordinances and laws that are designed to keep people safe and protected from one another and to prevent crime from happening. Unfortunately, we have relaxed some laws, and there has even been some suggestions in eliminating some laws or creating some ordinances that will allow people to use a certain defense if they commit certain actions. And there is a situation that's going on where people are committing crimes, misdemeanor crimes, some are federal crimes, who are not being held accountable. They are arrested and brought in, processed, but not charged and put back on the streets. We're living in a very dangerous time, and there's a lot of things that have happened that have contributed to that we have to change. We cannot allow anyone, regardless of their situation, be allowed to break the law. Everyone should be held accountable for anything that they do that is unacceptable. So we have to re-engage our laws. We also have to be very strategic and purposeful as we try to resolve this issue with police violence. I do not agree with defunding the police department because I said earlier, I have to have all four of those agencies have to be well staffed and well funded for me to protect the citizens of Seattle. But I do believe that we're going to have to continue, as we have in the past, to try to address this issue till we finally get the resolve of having to deal with some police officers who are able to get on the force, who have biases against people that look like me and decide that any chance that they get, they will harass or even kill us. The question I've had about defunding the police, while I understand the concept and I understand the definition, but the question I have is if we have an officer that's on that force that has biases against me as a Black man, no amount of sensitivity training is going to change their mind. No matter how many times you write them up, they're still going to commit atrocities. I mean, we're witnessing a situation now where the gentleman in Minneapolis had 18 citations on his record, but he was still out in the street and he killed Brother Floyd. There is no room for those type of officers on the force, and they should not be allowed to patrol in public. Those officers, if they are still on the force and we've defunded the department, the last hired will be the first fired. They're going one way. Those who are close to retirement have opportunity through attrition to retire. But you have officers on the force who have certain tenure and those biases, and they're still on the force, and we've defunded the police department. It did not help me. I don't think that defunding will stop that person from trying to hurt any people that they have biases against. And I do think there's an opportunity for reallocation within the department for better training, to provide better access to people with subject matter expertise, like mental health providers, de-escalation, all types of different people that can help a police officer do that job. We can make funding available within the department to bring them in, but they don't have to be police officers. But they do provide that expertise where they can work alongside of our officers and create a community policing atmosphere within the department. We have to take a look at some of the systems that allow some supervisors to be put in place where they're not watching these officers who commit these atrocities. We don't talk about them very much. We don't talk about the fact that you knew that this officer should not be out there patrolling the public, but you sent him out anyway. You got to be held accountable as well. So I think we have a long road ahead. We have to continue to deal with this issue, but we cannot neglect our responsibility of allowing the officers who have not committed atrocities but are good officers. We cannot handcuff them where they cannot keep us safe and protected as we go through this issue. We also have to rebuild the police department. One of the ideas that I want to try to put in place as a way to get more people on the police department that are from certain communities. I think it's important to have police officers who are from the community to serve the community. And I will be proposing what I call the Public Safety Youth Academy for students in their junior and senior year, where they can learn how to be a police officer, a fireman, an EMT, or human service provider. It's a 2-year program, paid internship during summer and Christmas breaks, where they would take certain classes the first part of the summer, but the second part, say, for example, if you're taking the police route, you will be patrolling your community with the officer that patrols your community, so you can get a feel of what it's like. And then we want to be able to see if we can encourage these youngsters, these young people, I shouldn't say youngsters, but our youth, our future leaders, to go into public service as one of those service providers. And that way we can rebuild our service delivery system in the police department in such a way where we can really push toward community policing, because we have officers coming from the community. So the number one issue is public safety, trying to make people safe again, which is going to have a positive impact on a lot of other things we have to deal with. The other issue, of course, is trying to help our brothers and sisters who are on the streets in makeshift tents and in RVs, who are waiting. They're in a waiting pattern to get an opportunity to get into permanent housing. While we are making strides to build permanent housing in places for people to live and get off the streets, there's a certain segment of the population that I just mentioned that have nowhere to go while they're waiting. I'm going to propose something what I call the Dignity Project, which focuses on safe spaces with all the services and amenities that people need who are living in the streets and RVs that can come to these places. We will set the tents up, build them out, provide everything in this community that they need, including security to protect them, and opportunities for them to revitalize themselves. I'm talking about beauty shops, barber shops, food tents. Everything they need will be in these communities so they won't go to the streets. We'll bring them here, we'll take care of them compassionately, but we have to be firm, because in order to make sure they stay off of the streets and take advantage of these communities, which will give them everything they need, we have to now advise them that we're going to be enforcing the law, which means that the laws on the books say you're not supposed to sleep in tents on the sidewalks and in RVs. So enforce the law, but we have a place for you to go so that you won't be breaking the law. But we will take care of you. We're very compassionate, but we're going to have expectations out of them. We want to give them more access to the service providers. We no longer want you to be camping in a makeshift structure under a bridge in a T-Mobile field, and you have to take a journey 3 days a week down to Belltown to try to get treatment. With this community, the service providers that provide your treatment will be right next to your part of the community. So you will get the treatment that you need on a consistent basis and have everything else around you. Then we'll engage the community, the city, in what I call dignity teams. And this is where residents from all over the city can get involved in the process by help supporting individuals that we're able to get into permanent housing. But we want to also get them back into the mainstream, which is workforce development, get them good paying jobs, get them the training where they can get employment that's sustainable, and provide them the type of income where they can live on their own again. But until then, we're going to need some people to support them while they're while they have transitioned to the housing, and then of course the workforce development piece. So it's a very unique project. We've got to put some pieces on it. Service providers have to be involved. People with expertise in setting up these type of communities to be involved. And I definitely want the residents to be involved in this process. I think we have enough will, determination, and caring people in Seattle that would love to be a part of this. It's completely unique, but I just can't continue to accept the fact that we have our brothers and sisters and families and youth and kids and seniors and veterans who are living on the streets and being shuffled from place to place. And I think this is the time for us to create places for them, to give them dignity, support that they need, tough love, to help them get out of this situation back into the mainstream. So I think those are the top two things I've been hearing about and I have some very unique plans to try to deal with those issues.
I've been doing this show for, I think, about 3 years now. One thing I've asked almost every single candidate is about the issue of affordability. That's one of the big issues on everybody's mind is the affordability in Seattle. Do you have any ideas about how, as mayor, you could help with that?
Well, let me give you some harsh realities that we need to accept first as we try to deal with this. Seattle is a city that is made up of a series of islands that are connected by bridges. So when you're talking about development and real estate, if you're able to build out, when I mean build out, I mean horizontally, where you have a lot of land where you can just continue to build out. But places like San Francisco, Seattle, Miami, New York are very similar because there's a series of islands connected by bridges, which means that we've pretty much built on every part of the land that's available. So we can't build out anymore because now we're running into water. So the only option to create density is building up. And that's why we're one of the most expensive cities to live in, because we don't have access to enough land to build outwards. So keep that in mind. The other thing too, it's a harsh reality, but we may have to accept the fact that everybody may not be able to live in Seattle because it's so expensive. And because we don't have any laws or any way to invoke rent control, there's not a lot the mayor can do when it comes to market housing. And even affordable housing is becoming more and more expensive because of the wages that have to be paid to people to do the building, the raw material, the products. Of course, the land is more expensive. So it's getting to the point where even if you build affordable housing, you still have to charge the rents in order to be able to cover the debt service. So I'm not saying that we should give up on it. We have to still be creative. We have to still build. The market will go up and down, which will help. But the one thing that I think that we can do from a city perspective is we need to diversify those who are building affordable housing, and we need to consider smaller developments as opposed to larger developments. For example, there are a lot of property owners in Southeast Seattle that have been rezoned where they can build maybe a structure 20 units, that could be 4 or 5 floors. Number one, it won't cost as much as building a development that's a couple hundred units. It'd be much cheaper. And which means that the lease rates could be lower and you can, and more affordable, and they can service the debt. But the problem that we have now is that our development policies do not, they're not inclusive of individuals that have these smaller pieces of property where they can do developments as well. So you can do one development of 200 units, or you can do, 20 developments of 10 units or 10 developments of 20 units. You're still accomplishing the same thing, but you have different developers that are doing it. Smaller scale development, you're able to maintain the integrity of the neighborhoods, and you also give people an opportunity to create wealth in certain neighborhoods, because there are a lot of property owners who are immigrants, who are minority, women-owned, who would love to be able to develop their own property, but they don't have the opportunity to do that. So what we have to do is take a look at our zoning policies, adjust them so that we can provide a pathway for smaller commercial property owners to be developers of their own property. We need to take a look at Department of Housing, maybe create a dedicated fund for the smaller type projects so they can get access to it by partnering with the nonprofit organization. We also need to maybe do some more investments into the non-traditional lending institutions where they can make available funding for people to be able to pay for the upfront costs, the pre-development costs, constructions, and architectural renderings and environmental. But right now, you have people who have property that want to participate and they can't because there's not a pathway for them to do that. So, in other words, let's accept reality, but let's begin to take a look at a different approach by giving as many people as possible an opportunity to help with the density. I would like to see, smaller buildings in neighborhoods that don't disturb the integrity I would like to see buildings that are done by the people who own their property rather than selling it. They're doing the development. And I think that we may be able to create some spaces that are affordable than what we have now. But that's just an idea that I'm thinking about that we're going to explore. But I still want people to understand that the geographical layout of Seattle is what it is. And we have to acknowledge that and then be more creative to combat that. And I don't think we've done it. I think we focus so much on huge developments that we've forgotten about small developments that can still accomplish the same thing.
I asked on Twitter for some people to submit questions just generally for candidates running for mayor and city council, and I got way more than I can ask you. But I'm going to pick out a couple of interesting ones if you don't mind. Give me just 1 minute here. Oh, yes. So let's see. Carl asks, coronavirus has shown that access to reliable, fast internet is essential with everyone staying at home. What is your plan for, or do you have a plan for a public broadband?
Well, that is something that the city has been working on for quite some time. I think the best way to deal with this issue is that the city is going to have to create a public-private partnership with the broadband providers. We really have to grow that relationship where we can use their network and we can structure some type of affordable rates for individuals with low income, where that they can have access to internet all over the city. Right now, I think that people try to negotiate with these companies directly. Matter of fact, one of our developments down at Seed, we have a relationship with CenturyLink, and some we have with Comcast. But that's a direct relationship with the company itself. What I would like to do is sit down with these providers, because they already have the infrastructure in place, and see if we can strike a deal, just like with cell phone towers, where with several of these companies, they share the cell phone towers. I would like to create a relationship where the city will be able to share some of the infrastructure that's already in place, where when people can sign up for broadband, they may be using Comcast or CenturyLink, but depending on your profile that you set up in the system, you are automatically be given a different rate, a much more affordable rate based on your situation. So the infrastructure is there, public-private partnership to try to get better access much quicker than us trying to build the infrastructure ourselves.
And then we've got former Seattle City Council candidate, Melissa Hall asks, what makes you most scared about the future of our city, and what makes you most hopeful?
Well, what makes me afraid about the future of our city? It's just unpredictable. The future is so unpredictable. I mean, you can prepare as much as you can, but it's unpredictable. You can't predict the future, and you know what's going to happen. And that's scary because when things come up like the pandemic or what have you, you have to make quick adjustments to deal with it. So that's my response to that. I mean, you never know what's coming. But what makes me optimistic is that Seattle is a very resilient city, very talented, very innovative. We have very smart people here. We have a lot of amenities that a lot of the cities don't have. So we have the ability to bounce back faster than others. It's just a matter of identifying the challenge, understanding the issues that are causing the challenge, and then coming together with the solutions to deal with it. So I think that unpredictability is one thing, but I think that we have the ability to address any issue or any challenge that comes towards us. But we just have to make sure that we come together under leadership and with a mindset of unification that we're going to get through this together.
Then one last one from Emily. They ask a really good question that really for any candidate. What is your kind of general view on what the role of government should be?
The role of government, there's several things. Number one, we are to take care of the basic needs of the citizens. You pay tax dollars, and you should get a return on your tax dollars and good service, which means that safe roads, clean water, reliable utilities like gas, lights, and electricity, police protection. In some instances, but not so much here in Seattle, but indirectly, school system, education. There are a lot of basic things that we're supposed to take care on behalf of the citizen. That's why you pay your tax dollars. The basics. The other thing is we are to make sure that everyone has opportunities to be able to thrive and be successful in the city, whether it's contracting, whether it's having transportation, maybe get to where you need to get to jobs and stuff like that, whether it's attracting businesses to the city to provide some things that we may not have, or businesses that are already here in the city, making sure that they stay in place to provide the things that we need, the services and goods. So the city it's very important for the city to create a climate, a very friendly climate toward the residents and also the businesses, and be the great facilitator among the residents so that when things happen, our role is to try to pull the residents together and say, we have this issue, this challenge that everybody needs to get involved with to solve it. Government cannot solve everything by themselves, but they can solve a lot of things if they reach out to the community to get their input, because there's a lot of expertise that can give us ideas and suggestions of how to deal with certain things. But we are a great facilitator. We're responsible for taking care of the people and their needs. And we're responsible to make sure that equity is paramount. And what that means is that everyone, no matter what your status is, your background or ethnicity, has access to what you need. And it's our role to make that happen. It's our role to be good stewards of the tax dollars, which means that we don't waste the tax dollars that you are paying us, that you are expecting us to do certain things with it. And the government is to be an example of how we should work together. The mayor's office and the city council, while we may not always agree on everything, but we have to resolve that no matter what it is that we're trying to accomplish, that we will find a common ground so that we can get something done on behalf of the people. We can't get too caught up in our philosophies and our thought processes that we take our eyes off of the responsibility of taking care of the residents of Seattle. So it's a complicated role, but there's a lot of different parts to it, and we just have to be prepared to deal with whatever we're supposed to deal with to keep the city in a good situation and to keep the residents safe and happy.
And then kind of my final question, the question I kind of ask every candidate who comes on the show is, we live in very polarized times. How would you as a leader, or how do you as a leader, work to bring people together?
Well, constant engagement and communication, and then setting the example. As I told you earlier, when I worked for U.S. Congressman, the best thing that we did was to set a protocol in place. When someone called the office and left a message, I said within 4 hours, call them back, even if just say, I got your message. If you get a letter that week, mail another letter back out, even if it's just to say, I'm responding to let you know I got your message. We have to be responsive to the voters and accessible and be willing to take time to listen to them and also take some of their suggestions and implement them if we can. Constant communication, we need to be very transparent and let the voters know what's going on. We also need to be very mindful that we are a diverse city. We have different opinions. We have different agendas, but we have more things in common than we have differences. And we need to focus on that. And my role is in anything that I do for the city of Seattle, I'm going to always look at it through that lens to make sure that we may not get everything that we want on either side, but we have to get something done that we can both agree with. So we'll lead the charge by creating a better relationship with the city council, a better working relationship. And that's going to start with building personal relationships and then good working relationships, having respect for one another where we communicate beforehand before we allow certain things to go out to the public to make sure that we are all on one accord. But as far as the voters, constituent customer service, respond, react, do what we say we're going to do, and communicate and keep you updated. I think if you do that with the city, that no group will feel that they are being ignored. We can facilitate more discussions with groups that may be rival because we're bringing everybody to the table to have discussion on things we want to do. So my goal is to provide the leadership and be the example as the mayor, and then work with council so we can be the example as a city government of how we need to work together, communicate, and function as a strong community in the body that's going to benefit everyone in the city.
And if people want to learn more about you and your campaign, where should they go?
You should go to LanceRandall2021.com. There's a lot of good information on there, and I would encourage you to take a look at my journey. You will learn a lot of information about how I got here, how I grew up. You see it told in pictures, in very short paragraphs. You also see information about my background and my pedigree with my father, my grandfather, and my sister. And you will see a detailed plan. My detailed plans is what I'm going to propose to do here at the city. And I'm saying propose because I have to present this to the voters, because I want you to chime in and I want you to feel as though you're part of these plans. These are just visions of what can happen and what I think we should do. And I will be open to getting any feedback or input of how we can perfect any plan before we implement it. So LanceRandall2021.com. I think you'll be inspired. And I just want to say, I know that, I've been in Seattle for 14 years. I'm not part of any clique. So a lot of people may feel they don't know who I am. But as I told you earlier, Jason, you know my work. I've touched the city in so many different ways. And I want to continue to touch the city. I'm not interested in any other higher office. I'm just interested in being the mayor of Seattle. And I'm going to give it the best that I have to make sure that we get through these challenges together as a city, and to basically lead us forward. So we're going to come out of this pandemic even stronger than we were before the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to my colleagues who are also running for the seat. I'm looking forward to interacting with them on the campaign trail and having debates and forums. My campaign is not a negative campaign. I have nothing against anyone. I will not criticize anyone, because to me, I think that's an insult to the voters, because I should be presenting to you my plans, my ideas, and my background. And if I have to tear someone else down, I'm not worthy of your vote. So please do not expect any negative things from me. I will be positive, and I'm optimistic that we're going to come out of this stronger than we have before. But we just have to get the right leadership in place with the plans and the background. And I possess all those qualities, and I trust that the voters of Seattle will give me an opportunity to serve them as their mayor and allow me to lead them forward to a more prosperous and sustainable future.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
You've been listening to Talk to Seattle, and I have been your host, Jason Rigdon. For more information about this podcast, please visit talktoseattle.com. Our theme music was Lobby Time by Kevin MacLeod and is used under the filmmusic.io standard license. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.